So we want to welcome everyone today to this ASCILITE ASIN jointly sponsored webinar on online will placements and projects. And with us are Harsh Suri and Frederica Kaider. Harsh is from Deakin. Freddie, what
Is also
institution
from
are you from?
Deakin. She's
Also from
very
Deakin.
humble.
So we want to welcome them today, and I'm going to turn it over to them momentarily. Before we do, we just want to acknowledge the Aboriginal elders, past, present, and emerging, and the lands from which we all join this session today. So without further ado now, I want to turn it over to Harsh and Frederica to share with us what they found in their project. So over to you.
Thank you,
Thank you so
David.
much.
Harsh, can I just jump in? I just want to apologise to everybody. Maybe it's a bonus for you, but I couldn't get my camera to work. So just imagine me as Catherine Zeta-Jones. So apologies.
I think Fred's prettier than that, and in my highly biased opinion. So, welcome everyone to this ASIN ASCILITE jointly hosted webinar, and thanks Bonnie and David for organizing this webinar. So, in this webinar, Fred and I will talk about our ASIN project, for which we partnered with colleagues from University of Tasmania, Emmett Maslow, and um, RMIT, Leonie Russell, and also our own Deakin University. From our own Deakin University, we had Wayne Reed. So what we'll do in today's session is I'll quickly, briefly go through what we found by talking to will practitioners from 17 universities, 17 Australian public universities. We'll talk about what were the key benefits and what were the key challenges we identified. Then we'll open it up to you to actually get some insights from you. How did you, did you find any benefits or challenges that we couldn't identify or that weren't identified in our studies? And also we would love to hear from you about the strategies that you found particularly effective. Then I'll hand it over to Fred, who will also talk more about the strategies that we found in our study. So just starting with what were the key benefits that we found in our study? First, it's very interesting that we started our study in 2019, and when the first webinar we hosted, I mean, there were a couple of national and institutional sessions that we hosted, which were face to face in those days because we could afford them, and we found really interesting response from the audience. It was almost like, yeah, online will has possibilities, but it's not real will. And so the sort of terms that colleagues would use is, but we're talking about authentic will experience, and online will doesn't quite provide that. So online will was still kind of seen as second best. But then just at the moment when we started our study full on, COVID happened, and due to COVID restrictions, lots of universities moved to online will. And since then, it's been fascinating how in our interviews, in the feedback that we've received, and since then in all the forums that we've facilitated, we found that essentially online will has become real will. And fascinating observations made by colleagues. So for example, in terms of benefits, we had lots of colleagues talking about how online will is essential for developing contemporary work skills. So lots of comments about how current work practices are moving online, and post COVID also most big businesses would partially or completely work online. So it's imperative that we build students skills and confidence in working online, developing professional skills development, and also enhance student agency, because when you're working in a face-to-face situation, you have more support in the sense, or rather more guidance, directed guidance from your will supervisor. Whereas in the online will environment, many colleagues commented on how they found that students were taking more agency, they were more kind of managing their own time, and suddenly they felt that students were stepping up in a beautiful way. Second, many colleagues commented on how online will suddenly created more possibilities for them to upscale will. So by overcoming geographical distances. So students from the country were able to join prestigious internships or projects from the metropolitan cities or interstate projects, or students from across various countries, various states could work together on a project, regardless of where the client was located or where the host was located and where students were located or where the university was located. So really we saw lots of different combinations of it. Second, what we found was that also some students in the past were not able to access different types of will. So, for example, students with career responsibilities or with other work commitments could not access international will opportunities or will opportunities which required them to travel. And in some ways, they felt that will made it more equitable for people, for students from various equity groups to access quality will. Again, many colleagues said that even pre-COVID, they had started exploring or they had started engaging with online will, because when they were working with small and medium enterprises or they were working with NGOs who didn't have infrastructure, for example, ergonomic desk space or other facilities, they found that online will offered lots of interesting opportunities. And in fact, that was the reason why many colleagues had ventured into online will space even pre-COVID. Many colleagues commented on how it was more efficient, so they could have interesting combinations. So for example, one colleague worked with an NGO, and the same NGO gave different projects, so 5 different student projects, and each student team could sit in, because in an online environment lots of people can attend the same webinar as we are doing today. And so what the industry partner was explaining to one team also enabled the other team to understand the context of the project that they were working on. So they found that they were able to really use the time of the industry partners very well and very effectively. And in some ways, it also helps students build in more agency. Again, some students had accessibility problems in the past, and so some colleagues had ventured into online will because it enabled those students to work from the convenience of their home. So accessibility came across as a very big point. In fact, some colleagues said that, in the past, even though we wanted to offer more students access, but we felt because of meritocracy, we had to select the best students. But now with online will, because of scalability, we can now offer it to more students. Again, continuing with the benefits, we found that many students interestingly felt that there was more enhanced support and connection. So one colleague said that, students are so used to joining everything online, they felt that online will enable them to engage with the experience from anywhere at any time, which wasn't possible in a face-to-face situation. So, which is again more kind of representative of the current work situation, because really these days we work from anywhere, anytime. Students felt more connected with the industry partner. A very interesting comment where they said that students said that because everyone appears on the screen and has the same size, if you're looking at the gallery view, they felt that suddenly there was less distancing from the industry partner and them. So they felt that they were kind of more connected with the industry partner or with the clients. They felt they could connect with the academic supervisors also better. And academic supervisors also felt that they could connect with the students better. Academic supervisors felt that they could connect with the industry better. So some colleagues commented on how in the past, at times they felt that, quality of will experience was left to chance depending on how good the industry partner was. But online will enabled everybody to maintain connections. So suddenly they felt more connected all along. Another comment was made, which kind of reminded me to online learning days about 20 years ago when we had started going online. And there were lots of studies that were done for no significance testing to say that is online learning as effective or online teaching as effective as face-to-face teaching. And the interesting thing that many of us found was that academics actually felt that when they were teaching online, they had to be better prepared. They couldn't leave anything to chance. So actually online teaching in some sense was more organized, better planned. And a similar comment was made by many colleagues that they said, in the past with face-to-face will, we felt that we could always kind of fix things later on as we went along. But because of online, will. We were doing it for the first time and we felt we had to get everything right. So we were better prepared and we put in more effort in getting organized, which in effect would also help the face-to-face will experiences. They felt because of the logistics, because travel was not involved, they were able to do more collaborative planning. And also in terms of managing expectations of what could be expected from students, how would feedback be managed. So all this better collaborative planning led to better management of expectations, from what can students realistically expect from a project, what can industry partners realistically expect from a project. So lots of benefits. At the same time, we did find there were some challenges that came up, like that our colleagues observed because of online will. So one of the, okay, first, many colleagues commented on how online will didn't enable that serendipitous exchange of information. Like you can build rapport, you just see another. So, the sorts of things that they felt that students couldn't just connect with somebody in the tea room. And often when students go into a site, they have a different kind of personal connection, which is often serendipitous. Or if the industry partner has to give feedback to the students, they can actually look at how the student is taking it and then tailor it. They can find appropriate moments. Students feel that, oh, they might see the supervisor and they might say, "Ah, I think the supervisor has a few moments I can ask." But in the online environment, those serendipitous exchanges could not take place. And so that way, it did have an impact on the kind of interpersonal connections that people could build in terms of building rapport. And lots of industry partners also said that. Accessibility issues, and although online will made will more accessible to many students, it also had its own kind of equity issues in terms of accessibility. So accessibility was not completely equitable in, first of all, digital access. So students from the country and in some areas even international students had the internet access problems, or they didn't have appropriate computing equipment with which they could use. Sometimes with the projects that were across time zones, they felt that it was very difficult organizing the right time. Again, with COVID, with everybody sitting at home and working from home, some students found it difficult to find adequate space. Like, I had to kick my son out today. He's not happy. But, those were the issues that many colleagues did comment upon. Again, while some colleagues said that, in the benefits, they felt that student agency was enhanced because students were better prepared with digital skills and they could teach their organization. Many colleagues also said that it wasn't the case for all students. So some students had difficulty with digital fluency, so they didn't have the adequate technical skills. And some students also had self-management issues. So in a face-to-face will environment, students went to the office environment and it was easier to manage their time, whereas when they were working from home, some students felt a little isolated and didn't have the adequate skills to manage their time. Issues associated with security, privacy, and policy issues came. So many colleagues said that really the universities aren't that prepared. So there's still limited legal and policy guidelines. What happens when a student is working on a will project from home? Issues of data security, cyber security, privacy, confidentiality. So while we've tried to, as Fred will talk about our guides, we did try to capture the insights that we gained from talking to colleagues. I think this is an area where we as a community need some more work to do. Next, we must accept that online will is not a panacea for all will experiences. So for example, certain core skills like occupational health and safety issues in a factory environment, now they can't be taught really unless students actually go to the on-site experience. And again, several organizations said that industry partners, while they were open to doing part of the will experience online, even post-COVID, they felt it was very important for students to come to the site to understand really how things are done in a factory situation or an industrial plant, or say perhaps in a medical clinic. So it's really important for students to be there. Some And then it was more COVID specific thing that just because of the timing of our study, some colleagues felt that it was hard because many organizations were going through COVID stress. So they weren't able to participate as effectively as they would have liked. Now, at this point, I would like you to go to a Padlet. I've posted the link here. David, could you please post the link in the chat as well? And we would like to give you 3 minutes to write down if you came across any benefits or challenges that you think we haven't quite talked about thus far. And we are really interested in hearing more about the strategies that you kind of found particularly effective to mitigate the challenges or enhance the benefits. Thanks, David.
Well, people are typing harsh. Do you want me to share that Padlet after people have had an opportunity to put in their responses?
That would be terrific. I'm just jumping in here, David. That would be terrific. And maybe even if we could share it while people are posting their strategies. Is that possible?
Sure, just give me 1 second to get everything situated and I'll share that on the screen.
No.
There's a lovely comment about proximity and authenticity. And yeah, and you know what we found? That in many colleagues felt that online will was proximal and authentic when you think of contemporary work skills. And it really depend on skills, whereas for some skills, perhaps it was not that authentic. And for some kind of experiences, it was not that proximal as well.
Well, I think though in most cases it was fairly proximal because students were working with personnel, and it probably varied in degrees to how much of the rest of their organisation in which they were involved. So on one level, it was proximal, but the integration and the sort of um, you know, embedding into the organisation probably varied. So, you know, their exposure to other workplace um, environments would have varied. Um, these are really good points that are coming up. Maybe 1 minute more. Okay, we might just finish here with the posts, and you know, as you're reading them as well, you can see a couple of themes emerging. Certainly prepare students, prepare them with digital training, specific digital training, which we haven't had to really do in the past unless you were offering online well. Some really good points about international that there's a lot more scope to have partnerships across different regions and countries. And some of the examples that we found from our practitioners, some were already doing online well before COVID, and a number of these were international examples. So they had already, you know, taken that step. I know Leonie's here, and I know that RMIT have, you know, run collaborative projects internationally for years. I'm going to ask one of the people who talked about meeting with the students and setting up the peer-to-peer sessions to maybe just talk a little more. Would one of you, because there are a couple of posts on that, or 3 posts at least, could you just elaborate on that a little more?
Hi, sorry, that was me. Hi, it's Leonie. That was me. Yeah, so we've got a few examples where and even well before COVID, way back when getting the pharmacy students who are out in regional and remote areas set up little Facebook groups so the students could check in with each other and share and talk. So that's now progressed to students setting up small teams, but with regular check-ins as a place for them to debrief what's good, what's terrible. You give them some guidance around that so that students are in a safe place to have their discussions about the challenges of engaging in online will. So it helps to keep that community together, as they would if they all came back together after or being on a placement.
Yes. Well, we certainly found from the respondents that there seemed to be a greater need for a lot of students to feel more supported, and that was either increased support from, you know, their university supervisor, or increased support from their workplace supervisor, or increased peer support. You know, often in the past, there were many cases of students just being sent out to the placement and maybe, you know, being checked in once during their placement. Some never had any check-in from the university, but it was a different environment. They were with other people, and certainly not as isolated in most instances as many students feel in the online environment. So that's certainly, you know, quite a significant strategy that is beneficial to the students. And the other one I just wanted to pick up on is managing expectations. The person who wrote that, could you talk to that a little bit? Or someone else could jump in. Well, in the absence of anyone jumping on managing expectations, we found that a number of the respondents also raised that students sometimes have unrealistic expectations of what they can achieve either with a project or in a placement, you know, very, very aspirational. And it's very beneficial to them to discuss that before they go out there, so they don't end up unnecessarily being disappointed or frustrated because they couldn't you know, achieve what they wanted to. So that's where, and a number of people raised this for sure, you know, the planning and the preparation of students. That's where, you know, that sort of goal setting and the parameters of the assignment or work that students are going to do on the project or the placement becomes critical.
And you know, Fred, so I'm also working like we're also doing an Australia India Council's funded project right now on SDG focused online wills and projects. And one of the things that we noticed was in the discussions we've had thus far, because online will opens up the borders to an extent that wasn't possible with kind of study tools, we find that managing expectations becomes particularly important because we have access to so many different kinds of industry partners now, NGOs, people from public sector, from private sector, and the sheer variety of projects that are possible, or the sheer variety of types of internships that are possible from so many different countries. Managing expectations of industry partners also came across as a very important theme.
Okay, well, thank you for these contributions. A lot of them are in line with what the practitioners who we interviewed said. So we're all in the same environment, facing the same sorts of challenges, and also thinking quite similarly about ways to approach this. So thank you for those contributions. David, can you now help us get back to the slides? Wonderful. Okay, so strategies. And so it's exactly what we did here. What are the strategies to mitigate against the challenges? And then what are the strategies to enhance the benefits? And as came out very clearly in your postings, the necessity to plan. And one way that you could look at the whole planning exercise is to use the ACE and Quality Will framework that looks at what do you need to do before students go on placement, what happens during the placement, and then what happens after the placement. Now, this is an appendix in the resources for practitioners, but in the resource guide, we took a slightly different clustering, and we looked at, you know, plan, create, and support. But for this purposes, we're going with the ACE and Quality Will framework. Now, that was essentially designed for face-to-face will, though it had, of course, a huge relevance for online will, and the project team have made some recommendations, and I know that others are doing work on accommodating to embrace online will as well. So before the placement, and you know a lot of this, tripartite contracts, so that might be contracts, you know, between the students, the university, and the host organisation and or the host organisation and or learning plans with between the student and the university and or so that and or the organisation. So there's any combination. But what is clearly important is the need to have some legalities around it, and legalities that also include things like you know, IP. Decisions need to be made about what sort of will type is going to be offered to students. Is it going to be a placement? Is it going to be a project? You know, the details of that, the achievements aimed for in that will project. And of course, that links a lot to what sort of assessment is going to be asked for. Students also need preparation, as clearly came through your posts, and that includes, you know, professional behaviour, dress, digital literacy, which is something that I could have learned before this presentation, and then I might have had a video. So digital literacy, terrific for students in IT and in some disciplines who've got high digital literacy, but in others, and I work in the Faculty of Arts and Education, you know, if you're doing a dance major or, you know, performance and drama, you might not be as digitally adept as other students. And again, depending on the organisation, you know, they differed in the degree that they wanted this sort of fluency. Online protocols, things that we take for granted, maybe, you know, the sort of backdrops that we have, you know, no interruptions, you know, preferably turning on your camera when you're meeting with your supervisor. It's amazing how some students do not do that. So, you know, an organisation I interviewed recently said, and they had both placement and projects, she said, I have never seen some of the students. So I think that's certainly some that we have to impress upon when we prepare students for working safely from home, but also working securely from home. So cybersecurity has become a big issue, as we read in the paper every single day, and in our resource guide for practitioners, we've certainly elaborated on that. Then during, things that Harsh mentioned, you know, digital accessibility, bandwidth, you know, devices, etc. Hopefully there is some host organisation induction, and that sort of links in with what Hans raised in terms of proximity and authenticity. So if students are fully inducted into the organisation with their policies and goals and meeting other staff and get a real sense of, you know, being fully integrated into that organisation, that's much higher in proximity than a student who only ever meets with their supervisor. Managing information online and cybersecurity, you know, students aren't always aware that they're getting information that should not be shared. That, you know, this is proprietary information from the company, and, you know, we take for granted that students know all that, but there needs to be a bit more explicit guidance on that. And this is a theme that very much came up in your postings, and that's increased direct support for students. And so regular communication with the practitioner and the supervisor, peer support groups, which you mentioned, and then assessments that are designed around the workplace experience. I've seen a number of, you know, WIL projects where students could have really just done it on their desktop overnight, where there was no linkage really to the experience that they were having in the workplace or that they were, having with workplace personnel. And, the types of experience you could think of like interviews. Students have access to a number of personnel. Well, they could interview, they could do an audit, they could solve an organizational problem, something that takes explicit advantage of the workplace environment. And I know that David Bowd writes about this quite a lot. And then, of course, students becoming reflective practitioners. Here's a great opportunity for them to reflect on, not only sort of organisational matters, but how they're tracking in terms of developing, skills. And then after the will experience, debriefing with the students, and if there's an opportunity to immediately get some of their impressions as soon as they've finished the experience, you get their fresh feelings and their fresh ideas, then there can be a more formal evaluation a little bit down the track. And ideally, this experience would be scaffolded and integrated within the whole course or program, and also integrated into their own professional profiles. And this is sort of maybe, it might have all been telling you what you know already, but I'm just sort of highlighting some of the significant features. So what we included in the practitioner's guide, was a section on pedagogical design. Again, we can't just take it for granted that people have had experience in designing good pedagogy around will. In particular, applying theory to practice. Students are not just having a practical experience. What they're also ideally doing is applying some of the theories and concepts that they've developed in an academic setting to the workplace. And that's the difference between sort of higher ed and vocational education. So we've got the research and the theory in addition to the practical application. I've talked about the assessments, and of course this is a great opportunity in developing an intentional strategy for developing employability skills. Again, not just leaving it up to chance or opportunity, but providing some guidance either in the assessment design or in some of the, reflective practice that you're asking of students, so that they are, intentionally aware of how their employability skills are developing. Very critical for their job applications and interviews. So if they can say, during a project with company X, I was able to, work in a team where we did this and whatever. So they can use those transferable employability skills to add to their professional profile. And again, I won't go over it again. We've covered the communication among all the parties. So I could now ask Harsh and David, are there any questions that we could bring into the larger group?
So there are some wonderful resources that Tom and some other colleagues have shared. Tom, I really liked your point about, asking students to reflect for developing a job application kind of thing using STAR technique. Could you talk a bit more about that, Tom?
Yes, well, let me just check. Is the audio working?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Excellent. So we tried doing your sort of conventional write a reflective portfolio, and that really didn't work. As well as the students, a lot of the staff had no experience of this. So I think it was Shane Flint who changed it at ANU we asked the students to find a real job and write an application for it. And in that, they have to explain their experience and use examples from how they went. And the beauty of this is a final year student who's about to graduate and be unemployed, none of them ever question how this could be relevant to them. And then we sneak all the reflective stuff in under the covers in the guise of writing a job application. And I team teach this with Tempe Archer from the careers unit at the university, where she teaches them how to think about what sort of job they want and what their life goals are and all that sort of thing. And the students will listen to that because it's assessed, it's for marks. So it's still not easy to do, especially online, but it works a lot better than just telling them to write a portfolio.
Thanks. Yes, it definitely needs some guidance. I mean, you know, they're not just, reflections aren't just streams of consciousness. They're really, you know, reflective practices is on the continuum of professional development. I mean, you know, we all go through performance appraisals, and part of that process is reflecting on our performance and our behavior, and then developing strategies to, you know, advance our performance. So, you know, this is the...
Yes. Sorry, I just forgot to mention that I put a link into version 5 of this portfolio exercise in the chat, and that's under a Creative Commons license. So you're welcome to use the rubric and the word limits and the marking schemes and all that stuff from there. There's also a couple of papers published on the subject.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I think that's attracted quite a lot of interest. And Hans, you've asked whether the reflections would be an individual task. What's the response from you?
I'm just wondering about where these reflections go. So sometimes it just feels a bit like they create a lot of work, but I'm wondering. I remember an example where students, as co-investigators, would help gather data that would make a very busy academic tick 2 boxes. One, it was research, and 2, it was the will experience. So I'm just wondering about students as co-investigators to study the phenomena that they encounter in the industry in a structured way. You know, engineering is a classic example where you've got just trying to think of the guy's name. So
I know, Hans, I know that there's some good examples of that. Shiva Krishnan in our Master of Engineering Professional Practice, it's a large program at Deakin. He's been trialing that, and they've got some really good insights. What they are doing is they get students to engage with the industry partners, but then reflect on it, and also then write down how does it feed back into the course. So I think you're quite right. Engineering is doing some fantastic work in this space.
yeah, good. It'd be nice to share examples of how it can add value, not only not to the student, to the academic, and to the industry at large. It's particularly topical in IT, and IT is a less defined space. It's very dispersed. And what are the experiences of IT students in industry that can be brought back in a structured way? So not open-ended questions, but quite structured ones that create a valuable data set.
Excellent. So Hans, this sounds like a very exciting prospective project for some ASIN funding, don't you think?
Yeah, who's in?
This sort of, I mean, reflective practice, done well is enormously, and typically we look at it as, on an individual sort of student basis, but you've just expanded, that whole concept. So I think this would make a wonderful research proposal.
I think Karen Young from Deakin might be interested because she looks at IT, and I know
Yes.
Shiva Krishnan from Deakin would also be interested, Hans. So perhaps we could take this offline. Leonie, you've raised your hand.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to bring it back to something that Tom was talking about, around the students and their resumes. I know in the past we've worked with our careers team to have examples of, this is what your resume may look like before you do WIL, and this is what it looks like after you've done WIL, using the STAR process. So it gives examples of how students can then articulate the value that they've got out of their WIL experience to align that to their resume, and how they would then address selection criteria, and also how would they answer interview questions. So taking it straight to that endpoint, or how would you even reflect it on your LinkedIn profile, is heaps easier than having to work through a whole big, reflective journal or something like that. We try to get them to that very end point and then build that into assessment for them to do that. So if you can get examples like that done up, the careers team are always good to help out. That's easy for the academics to understand. Students can see, oh yes, I did do an online WIL project, and this is how I would answer that interview question, and this is how I would respond to a selection criteria. So I just want to take that.
But I think you raise an important point in terms of students intentionally doing that. I mean, we sometimes think that just through osmosis that students will know to do all of that, because it makes sense and is logical for us, but they don't necessarily. So assisting them to do that is really important. All right, we've probably got time for another 2 questions or 2 comments if anyone would like to offer them. No, people a little shy in coming forward. So let me then, well, in that case, we'll just talk about us. Let me just tell you a little bit about the 3 resource guides. One of them is for the practitioner, the WIL practitioner, and so not all of it would be relevant for everyone, because we've got a lot of people who are experienced in the field, and so they know a real lot of that. What might be a little new to them are the sort of cybersecurity aspects and a bit of the digital training that we've mentioned in that. It's a fairly long guide, so the best way to use it would really be to read through the sections where you think, this offers something new. Then the guide for industry is considerably shorter because it's a different target group. And that's really, again, some industry partners or community partners would be familiar with that. But the new organisations partnering with us, it might be beneficial to them. And then thirdly is the student guide, again, which is not too long. And in fact, we had a little bit of feedback from students on it. And So here I'm saying it wasn't too long, and they go, oh, this is way too long. So we redesigned it and made a sort of summary page. So at the end of the day, they might only read that one page. We sort of had to think about whether we would go into all the digital and cybersecurity detail, and we decided not to, because it would have just become longer and longer and turned students off. So some of the assumption is that they will get that as preparation training before they go on to a WIL assignment. So are there any questions about the resources? No, just been perfectly clear. So I think in that case, we could take an early minute and, you know, just finish off by thanking our team. You saw that in the previous slide. Oh, so that was our team, and we had a couple of assistant researchers, Dr. Julia Alessandrini from RMIT and Dr. Tu Dang from Deakin. So, and of course we had funding from ASIN. So with that, thank you very much for your participation today. You've raised some terrific issues, and of course, you know, we thank ASIN for the funding, and we thank ASCILITE for hosting this session, and thank ASIN for hosting the session. So, and a special thanks to David for helping set it up for us. Thank you.
And thanks, Harsh and Freddie. We really appreciate you coming along. We do want to acknowledge that this was done in partnership with the Australian Collaborative Education Network, and they are primarily the organization working in this WIL space. So if you do have interest in WIL, we definitely recommend that you check out ASIN. And of course, those of you who are from ASIN joining us, I do have to put in a bit of a plug for ASCILITE. We are the organization for computers in learning in tertiary education, and sort of working in that space across Australasia. So if you have interest in ASCILITE, you can find us at ascilite.org. We want to thank our presenters, Fache, and all of you for coming along. And you can find other upcoming events right there on our homepage. We tend to do these webinars once a month, but also check out our special interest groups, as they are open to both members and non-members. And Harsh is one of our leaders for our business education SIG, but we do have SIGs around learning analytics, and learning design, educational development. So you can check those out. And thank you all for coming along today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Okay,
David.
thank you. And thank you, David.